I knew this man was clinically dead. There was no doubt about it. I saw he had every monitor you could have. There was no heart rate. There was no breathing. He was blue. I felt for myself, I felt there was no pulse. And after it was over and he finally came back after several rounds of CPR, he looked down and he told me, he's like, I just want to say thank you, and I was like, well, that's kind of what they pay me for, but you're welcome. And he said, no, he goes, I don't think you understand. And he goes on to explain to me, he's like, I saw you. And I'm thinking, well, he saw me as I was wheeling the crash cart in because I was the first one in the room. And he's like, no. And he proceeded to tell me every single detail. And he was telling me things that were happening outside the room.
Today, my special guest is my friend Julie Hedenborg, and we're going to be talking about her book, Everyday Miracles 32 Real First-Hand Testimonies that Reveal God's Miraculous Power. Julie, it's always a joy to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Shaun. It's really an honor to be here.
It's kind of trippy because you interviewed me last week for your show, and now I'm interviewing you for my show. And we also did an interview about the same book when we were both at NRB several weeks ago. So we have gotten to talk more in the last month, I think, than we had in the past 2 years.
We have, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, and Julie, I know to some of my audience, you're going to be very familiar because I think we have some crossover between your show and my show. But for the folks where this is the very first time they are getting to meet you, I'd love to have you share a little bit of the Julie Hedenborg origin story, superpowers, special abilities. What's going to make you memorable? Share those things with us now.
I don't know about the superpowers, but I'll share my origin story. Yes, I am a podcaster, but I used to be a nurse, and God really redirected my whole life to do podcasting, which is something that I never expected. But a little bit about my faith walk, just as a background. I grew up in beautiful Lexington, Kentucky, horse country, and I attended a sweet little Christian church. I wouldn't say it was it was not legalistic, but I would not say it was full of people operating in the gifts of the Spirit, hearing from God and things like that. We learned the Bible stories. We had potlucks every Sunday after church. It was a very sweet church, and we memorized scripture, and it was a sweet little upbringing. But I got to college, and I went through some traumas of some different things, kind of some hard things. I didn't include those in the book just out of respect for people, but I had a professor who I adored in medical anthropology who one day was talking to me, and he basically told me he was an atheist, and he had this theory that, when we die, there's nothing. It's just man's modern day Santa Claus. We can't cope with the fact that we are mortal beings. We die and that's it. And that really rattled me because this was a man I had a lot of respect for and was kind of a father figure at that time in my life in a way. And so at that point, my faith was very shaken, and I kind of led me into this spiritual wilderness. And then I went into nursing. I was working in the ICU when I had a pretty amazing experience, and it really opened my eyes to the supernatural. And I experienced a patient who had an out of body experience. And when he was clinically dead, he was able to prove to me what he saw was real. And I verified all of it because some of it was happening outside the room, which was really crazy. Now I understand that a little better than I did at the time, but it opened my eyes. And then I guess around 2015, I was working as a nurse in the prime of my career, doing nurse anesthesia, kind of almost to the point where I might start teaching, heading off into the sunset. I was cutting back part-time, enjoying my family, feeling comfortable about who I was and my role. And God spoke to me for the first time in the OR. I had no idea it was his voice. I did not know at the time. I did not listen because I thought I had eaten something bad. I don't know. Because the voice said, this part of your life is over. And it was crystal clear with authority. And I just felt like, why would I think that, And lo and behold, a few years later, I'm doing this podcast. But yeah, there was an injury too in an ambulance. There's so many pieces, but he led me in a path that I never expected.
Yeah, I mean, what you referred to with your patient, I mean, that is kind of the ultimate shared death experience where the person is able to recount what was happening in the room where their body was, what loved ones are talking about in the waiting room. That's probably the biggest third party verifiable kind of circumstance we can have in a near death experience. I mean, a lot of people say that that is the future of near-death experience studies, is these sort of shared experiences, and especially what you just described. Like when you had that happen with that patient, like did you even have a grid for near-death experiences at that point, or were you just like, what do I do with this?
I'd heard some patients talk about like, oh, I saw the light, or I went, but we actually have physical bright lights, in the rooms. And I had heard people talk about it. I think the first book I ever read, and this was past this time, but was the Burpo story, Heaven is for Real. And I was even skeptical with that because I'm like, this is a pastor writing this book, and which I hate to admit it. And for the record, the Burpo family, I did read the book and I was very touched and I do believe the story. But at that point in time as a nurse, I didn't have a grid for that at all. And that what my professor had said really stuck with me and it made me question things. So when that happened, and I knew this man was clinically dead, there was no doubt about it. I saw he had every monitor you could have. There was no heart rate. There was no breathing. He was blue. I felt for myself, I felt there was no pulse. And after it was over and he finally came back after several rounds of CPR, he looked down and he told me, he's like, I just want to say thank you, and I was like, well, that's kind of what they pay me for, but you're welcome. And he said, no, he goes, I don't think you understand. And he goes on to explain to me, he's like, I saw you. And I'm thinking, well, he saw me as I was wheeling the crash cart in because I was the first one in the room. And he's like, no. And he proceeded to tell me every single detail. And he was telling me things that were happening outside the room, which we know now, there's a span of view when you're in your spirit body that you don't have in your human body. And that is what I couldn't get past because I'm like, okay, say there's some residual activity in the brain that we don't yet grasp. They say, the hearing, on the brainstem, hearing is the last to go. So I'm like, could there have been some residual function that we're not aware of? No, this was outside the room. There's no way he could have known that. And I couldn't get past it. And there was a moment, Shaun, that's really special because in that moment when he was telling me this, I was kind of crouched on the floor, picking up all the like EKG strips and caps and different things that fall on the floor. And we had turned the lights back down. So it was a little dark. It was at night. And my hair was kind of hiding my face, but we were talking and it just, this flood of thoughts came to me. Obviously, number one, my professor was wrong. We are spirits, number one, in a body. And we go somewhere. I was just having this progression like, okay, so heaven, hell. And then it hit me. Oh my goodness, Jesus, the one who died for me. I have neglected Jesus, for the last however many years. And I got really emotional and I got overwhelmed in that moment on the floor. And my heart, I was like, Jesus, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so, so sorry. And I felt like in that moment, and again, no grid for the supernatural, really. I felt in that moment with my heart just so full of shame and sorrow and regret. I felt like Jesus was standing there. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. I just felt like suddenly, as my heart was pouring out this emotion, he was right there. And I felt like he was looking down at me and he was saying, I'm here. I love you. And I've always been here. And I didn't feel any condemnation. I didn't feel like I really believe he was talking to me. And even that I didn't grasp in the moment. I just felt this peace come over me that I didn't understand. It was just like, okay, it's going to be okay, And I turned back to Jesus, but it was still years before I got back on track with my finding a church and growing in my faith and really understanding it. Because at that time I was still like, well, is the Bible really real? And how do we really know? And and even John, I was telling him, I'm like, at the time I might have even thought, well, when you die, there's this portal. Like it's only when you die. I don't know. I just had so much to learn. So yeah, becoming a nurse, I did see, and after that in the ICU, I did witness a man who had I believe, a hellish experience. He was not my patient, but I saw him in the code. I saw him come out of it and the terror. And I don't know what he experienced, but he was crying out for the chaplain. I don't want to know what he experienced. I still can remember feeling the fear on him. And then as I would kind of slowly open up, because not even all nurses experience this, but when you find the veteran nurses that have been around for a while, and I would tell them like, this happened, and then they would tell me, oh yeah. And they would tell me all these different things. So it really opened my eyes working in the ICU. Now doing anesthesia, I can't say I saw that. Generally, just so you know, people, when they're out, they're out. Although we have had people like Mike Olson and people like that while they died in the OR, they had an experience. But so it was really in those limited 2 years that it was a big shift.
When I think of books like Heaven is for Real, and there were a whole slew of Don Piper's 90 Minutes in Heaven, like the late 90s and in the early 2000s was a pretty big heyday for heaven, and I would call them heaven NDE light books. I don't feel like the conversation was quite as broad back then, but then you had a handful of authors recant their stories and say they were lying, and then I feel like the grace on heaven books and NDE light books kind of shifted and was gone for quite a while. Not really until I feel like John Burke's book Imagine Heaven opened up the space for whatever reason that made it okay for us all to have these conversations again, and I'm thankful for that. But it is interesting to see how I feel like the books have shifted, because a lot of what you saw coming out of the 90s and early 2000s was, again, individual testimony kind of books, which are very normal in the Christian publishing space. But it's not really until Imagine Heaven that I feel like you had a solid Christian discussion trying to happen around the form and the function. What does this all mean? And starting to wrestle with that. So I'm thankful that John opened up that space for us, so both of us can have podcasts and have fun discussions in this space. For you, like what was it that let you know it was time to step into podcasting? Like you and I both have joked that we were not really willing participants in this space. God just kind of put us here, and we're like, okay, here I am contributing somehow. But I've been podcasting for like 11 years, so this is super normal for me. Like what was it that made you know it was time to get into podcasting? And then tell us, how did you even go about finding your first guests? I feel like God had to drop those into your lap too.
He absolutely did. Yeah, it was really interesting. I have absolutely no background for what I'm doing. I mean, I have the Holy Spirit. That's all I need, really. But and a yes, I did say yes, but I had a vision from God, and I've been uncomfortable saying that for the longest time because I am not someone. I don't typically have a lot of visions. I typically have nudges or just a discernment in my gut, a feeling, about things, as far as how I hear from God. I feel like, but I had a really rough year in 2015. I had an injury to my neck. There's a lot to the story, but basically, I found myself in an ambulance, and I didn't know if I was going to make it. Two arteries to my brain had dissected. I had some small strokes. They found an aneurysm, a pseudo aneurysm. And I was lying in the back of an ambulance Googling my prognosis, and it said, for those that survive, I was immediately like, oh my goodness, like, because it's not something I see a lot in the OR. I know I'm a nurse and I've actually done neuro, but this is not something that happens all the time. So in the ambulance, I heard the paramedics speaking to one another, or the paramedic and the driver, and I heard the severity. They didn't know I could hear them. And they said, we can't hit a pothole. We can't hit a bump. We've got to take a very special route, smooth ride to get her there. And I realized there was a clot that was forming because of the injury. And the reason that people usually pass away, which sometimes they do, is because the clot gets larger and then it goes to the base of the brain and you're dead instantly. And so in that moment, I cried out to God in the ambulance, and I prayed a very dangerous prayer, and I meant it. And I prayed to God. I said, Lord, please, I have a 5 and 7-year-old. My husband is younger than me by a couple of years, and we have a very beautiful family. So, Lord, I don't want to die. I don't want to leave my family. I'm not ready. I think in my spirit, man, I know salvation is by grace through faith. It's not about works, but I knew intuitively, like, there's more for me here. I'm not ready. Like, I just knew that. And I asked him, I said, Lord, please let me share you with one more person, just one more person. And I said, I didn't put this in the book, but I actually said, I'll take a Satanist, like anybody, give me whoever. And I meant it, Shaun. I meant it. And that was 2015. Miraculously, I came out of the ICU after 3 days in intensive care. I survived. Obviously, I have no residual issues, which is a miracle. There are some people that have one of the three things that I had that have permanent nerve damage. They have a feeding tube. They're paralyzed partially. I mean, there are so many things that could have happened to me. And to come out of that unscathed, I just, it's not about earning it, or I just wanted to glorify him with the rest of my life in some way. My life changed in that moment. And when you have a moment where you think, I might be meeting Jesus right now, like, it is sobering, and it will inspire you. The fact that I do public speaking right now is because I said that prayer. I don't actually like to do public speaking. But anyway, it took 3 years. There were lots of things I had to go through until I had the vision. But I had a beautiful career. I had 8 years of college to do anesthesia. I loved my job. But in that, after the injury happened, um, they told me I could come back to work at a certain point, they said, you could still technically have a stroke doing anesthesia. I'm like, I can't do this to this person. So I quit my job with the intention of going back. I didn't really know. I just felt like I knew God was redirecting me. I lost one of my best friends at the time. And then shortly after, a doctor told me, as I'm trying to heal, and a doctor told me, you're disabled for your job because I have chronic scoliosis that, well, I'm battling. I don't want to receive that. I'm battling scoliosis, and it's pretty severe. It's about 66 degrees. So there were days where I couldn't feel my left leg at work. I would love doing the little kids, and I would carry them. So there were physical issues, but hearing the doctor say, you're disabled for that job, that is a really hard thing to hear, when you feel like you're in the prime of your life. And so all these things were happening. I was so angry at the person I felt was responsible for the treatment that I had on my neck, that I felt caused the injury. And I knew I had to forgive. I just didn't know how. I felt like, you almost left my my children without a mom, and they were ignoring me. I just felt discarded. I lost my whole community of people in anesthesia that had on my baby showers. They knew my dating stories, and these were people I had been with for years. And so my life just fell upside down. And suddenly this beautiful job that I had where I was praying, walking through the corridors, praying with patients, I felt like God was using me there. I mean, it was a beautiful thing, but God had something better. And I couldn't see it at that time, but it took me 3 years to get to a point where I knew God was doing something, obviously, and I knew he had protected me. I knew this was not from him, and I knew he was going to use it. But I had many moments crying in my car where I was saying, Lord, Romans 8:28, like, seriously, how are you going to use this? Like, and I wasn't mad at him. I was just frustrated. And I don't know. I just felt like so much was happening at once. And I was at this meeting in California, to answer your question finally. 2018, we were in California at a coaching event that my husband is really into business coaching. And I thought I was just there to kind of support my husband. And they had all these models on the wall about how to grow your business, and like business funnels and different things. And one of the words on the wall was podcast. And I'm just there with him, again, crying out to the Lord, like, Lord, I know you're doing something. Show me. Am I not ready? Like, have I missed it? You're in that in between. It's so hard. And I saw the word podcast on the wall. I didn't even listen to podcasts, Shaun, but it was something supernatural. When I saw that word, it was like a spotlight was on it. And even though there were words across the whole wall, that was the only word I saw. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to start a podcast, because then it's not just my testimony, it's yours, Shaun, and it's this person and that person. And I knew that I knew that I knew. And we were doing a little breakout session, so my husband wasn't next to me. And I wanted to tell him, I was so excited. And I go to turn to find him in the room. And we're in this huge conference room in Santa Clara, California. And on the wall, there was a huge wall in the back of the conference room, blank wall. And as I turned, this is going to sound really strange, but this is what I saw. It was like an invisible hand had like a pencil or a piece of chalk. There was no color. There was no red curtains. There was no Ezekiel bones. Like, it was not dramatic. It was just this hand drawing back and forth, back quickly, stacks of like slabs. And the slabs were stacking in front of me, and they were going up quickly. And I'm just standing there like, and it was almost like grayscale. Like, it wasn't solid, but I saw it. And as it went up, I knew the knowing was stronger than the image. If that makes any sense to people that have visions, maybe. I knew they were testimonies, and I knew they were different types of testimonies, different types of people, and they were going up, and the whole thing lit up, and it flashed up with light, which I knew this was a monument to God, to give him glory, to inspire faith. And it was important. I couldn't see the top of it, which someone told me there's significance in that. It went through the clouds. I don't know what that means. Like, it'll outlive me, or I don't know. Again, I don't usually have visions, but I was absolutely awestruck. And my poor husband, I talked about it for days. It's going to be amazing. Like, And then I got home and this was 2018. And I realized like I was so fired up, but like I had no idea how to do this. Now, my husband had a podcast. So God in his providence, that was very helpful to have someone who like, I can help you get started. And I was so anxious. I think I recorded the first one like 50 times. Like I was so out of my comfort zone. But God had to lead me, but it almost went flat before it even started because, here I am. I didn't even know how to pray a bold prayer. I was like, God, I know you want me to do this. I got this back issue as if he doesn't know, like, and as if he couldn't heal it. That's where I was. And I want people to hear that about my story because God did all of this through someone who was growing the whole time and continues to grow. But I prayed and I said, if you want me to do this, I will do it. If you send me people, but then after I said that, I started planning because I'd heard all these testimonies while I was going through my struggle. And it was like, I can get her and we'll have infertility and and I was trying to do it all in my own will and nobody, like after I made the announcement, I said, got all these amazing people that are going to come on and share. And nobody said yes. And I got humbled really fast. And I just got really down. And I said, Lord, please, like, I know you called me to do this. I know this is the path you're putting me on. I just know it. And I said, but I need you. Will you show me? Will you lead me in this? I need your help. And of course, even though I had heard God's voice in my head before in the OR, it didn't come right away. I heard nothing. And I just felt very disappointed. And I remember I had a hair appointment. So I went to my hair appointment and the first one, the way it happened, it was actually funny. We were in the salon and I was still kind of down about it. Like I hear nothing. I don't know what's going on. And I've already messing up. I haven't started yet. And there was one other woman in the whole salon. And this is crazy, but we both had our heads in the sink. And my hairdresser was like, well, tell me about this podcast you were talking about. And I said, yeah, it's going to share miracles to give God glory. And I hear, I've got a miracle. And she was getting her hair washed in the sink next to me. And from there, it was people in airports, libraries, grocery stores. I mean, you name it, prayer groups. One time I was on a rock in Aruba, and because of my back, I do pray, and I know God can heal me now, and I believe He's going to at some point. I trust Him completely with that. But she had a wound on her arm, and being a nurse, I identify things quickly. And she had a tattoo over it that said "blessed," and it was the bullet hole was in the middle. And so here we are, both of us, because she has the hardware and I have my back. We're sitting out while everybody's on these slippery rocks. And she ended up being on my podcast, like just random. And it was so neat in the beginning, Shaun. Now I have more people through my website that I can interview. But in the beginning, I would pray and it would happen. And my husband even said, if I didn't see this, I wouldn't believe it. But it was so clear, perfectly timed. And the things he was sending me were so much better than what I was trying to do. And NDEs came up very quickly, I think within the first 10 episodes. And I was really thrown by that. So that was a whole nother level of trust. And you're right. Poor John Burke, I think he gets mentioned in every interview we've ever had, but he was the factor for you and for me. And I do feel like his book, I first went to YouVersion when I got that testimony. And I had prayed really hard because I got a demonic testimony and I wasn't ready for that one either. And I said, Lord, you're going to bring me something amazing. You're going to use it powerfully. And I just know, I'm going to know that I know. And like within 24 hours, I had my first NDE. And I felt like it was right from God. And I hadn't even heard it yet. And I thought, this is crazy. What am I doing? People are going to think I'm nuts, So I went to YouVersion and I searched, life after death, afterlife. And I found his book and I read his book. And then it was like, okay, there is a framework, a biblical framework to justify, validate these experiences. And maybe they are from God. And maybe if we're dismissing them because of our own pride, we're missing out on this amazing testimony. So yeah. And even then I didn't share every NDE that I got in the beginning. It's the same with every other miracle story that I have. I always pray and I ask the Lord to lead me. And I haven't been perfect. I continue to grow as we all do doing this. I do feel like there's grace with it, when God calls you. I mean, look at the Bible. Nobody was really, even Mary lost Jesus for 3 days. All of them, none of them were perfect. So I just keep seeking him with every single episode. And it's looking back, this is year 7. And it has just been the most amazing journey ever. And the irony, like after grieving the loss of my career, which I really loved, it was the only thing I felt like I did well in my whole life. And someone said to me who was working on my back, like, we might be able to get you back to work. Like, I had this feeling of, no, I don't want to get, and this is not work for me. This is a calling. And, I don't know. I've been so blessed. I'm number one, I'm learning who God really is for myself, and not to make it all about me, but like, I've been blown away. One day I will make a collage of my shock and awe faces because it would be hilarious. But yeah, God could really use anyone. And that's another thing I want people to see in the book is if God is calling them to step out, like I almost chickened out when I got back from that conference. And after being so sure that's what it was. But God will equip you, He will lead you, and He can do more through you. Remember, it's Him working through us. We're not the power source. We're just the branch, right, of the vine, right? So yeah, I'm going on and on, but it's exciting to share what God has done, and I love the people that I'm meeting, and being able to share their testimony, and then seeing the fruit of it. And I know you and Randy have seen it too, and then John too. This is changing people's lives, and it's more than just entertainment. It's more than clicks. So yeah, I get to do this, and I'm excited for what's the next.
Yeah, and what I love about your book and some of the books that Randy and I have worked on as well is, there is this interesting space where you can make a book out of interview content. Like it's taking something that was never intended to be in a book. It takes some editing and some massaging to make it work, certainly. But we've proven across multiple projects that there is a demand for this sort of thing. And I always tell people, somebody might be willing to watch a podcast and somebody else might be willing to read a book. And so it makes these testimonies portable in a way that's a little different because not everybody wants to watch YouTube or listen to or any of those things. And so it just allows us to reach a whole different audience, I think, with these stories. For you, you do tend to try to strike a balance between not just sharing, because like a lot of channels will just focus on NDEs or miracles, but you've had a range of both. Like for you, why has it been important to have a balance, on your channel and in the book as well? Because again, most people fall into one niche or the other, but you've intentionally been very balanced.
I would say, again, not having done this perfectly, I intentionally really I pray all the time, Lord, show me what you want. And honestly, Shaun, I have done, well, some people get mad at me when it's not an NDE. They're like, this is not even an NDE. Okay, I'm a miracle show. But, and the NDEs are very popular. I don't feel like, well, maybe now that there's so many more channels, I don't get the views I used to. Again, it's not all about the views, but I've had some heavy content, really heavy. Like I had a woman on my show. I think I might have referred her to you for your grief podcast, but she was a minivan mom who was just picking up one of her kids. There was a blind spot or something happened where she didn't see a motorcycle rider and they collided and he was killed. And she spiraled. I mean, this was a model citizen, mother, faith person. She almost had to go to prison. Like it was a major deal. And she ended up having a vision, a healing type of vision that God healed her. Her testimony is amazing. But now she has, I think, the only ministry on to help people that have caused accidental death or injury in the country, maybe in the world. Hopefully there's more coming, but she gets calls from pastors around the country. And that was a very heavy episode to do. I have another episode, Miracles of Comfort, and so many people. I had a woman who lost her son from a drug overdose and found him and had to go through a long journey of healing. It was very difficult. And she shared her testimony. Those are so challenging. But they're so needed. And I might get a less amount of feedback on those, but the feedback I get is like, oh my goodness, I needed this today. And so I really try to let him lead me. And I can't explain it. It's not like I hear his voice, this is the one, or, it's just their highlight. I feel like they stand out, or I'm like, yes, this needs to be heard. And so, yeah, there's a wide variety of topics, but I really do try to lean in. And I don't want to, the NDEs are amazing. They're amazing, but I don't want to get wrapped up. I just want to do what God wants me to do, and I do have some NDEs that I have booked right now. There's an NDE that I met of a woman through Misty. So again, I just felt a yes on that. So, and I'm usually pretty close, with my discernment. I feel occasionally I'll feel a little bit of a hesitancy and I don't know why. And all I can say is, and I want to give the person a reason, but sometimes I just feel like, ooh, I just don't know why this doesn't feel right. And if I ignore that every time, I regret it. Every time. I've just learned like, it doesn't matter. I have to explain to the person. And it's really hard because it's a personal testimony, but I'll just say, I'm just feeling a pause on this for right now. So yeah, I really try to have discernment. I pray every day for discernment on these things. I take it very seriously because one day, Shaun, we're going to stand before Jesus like everyone else. And I feel like there is a responsibility when you have a calling. And again, he's not a slave driver expecting us to be perfect, but I want to stand before him and I want him to say, well done, and I want to know that I have given him glory through what I have done. It's not about me. It's not even about the person, but, I hope on that day, I can live the rest of my life out, whatever's left, in a way that points people to Jesus.
Well, and, the book, just like the show, like we've implied, it's a mix of NDEs testimonies. It's a mix of miracle testimonies. Like for you, as you look across the content in the book, what's the thread you hope everybody sees as they read through all the different types of testimonies and stories that you share?
Jesus is real. He loves you. No matter what you've done, there's some people here that are in a very low spot. A woman who is trafficked, on the floor, beaten, and she hears the voice of God and he loves her. He wants better for her. There's a man who was a drug dealer. There are different types of people, but the love of God, the heart of God comes through every single testimony. The power of prayer, the word of God is true. Darren Ham had a shared death experience and he was a total atheist in a process of a divorce, made fun of his wife for chasing the invisible man. And he comes out of this shared death experience and he admits the first thing he was a completely different person. And he said, I want to get a Bible. I have to get a Bible. And he said the Bible was the only thing that gave him context for what he experienced. Suzanne Seymour, she's in the book. She talked about how the Bible was so important to her. So the Bible, prayer, God is real, redemption is available, healing is still happening, even though it may sound crazy for me to say that, as I still trust that mine is coming. And Shaun, it might be on the other side of the veil. Regardless, I will be thrilled to do this for him. And I celebrate every single one of those. And it may look different for everybody. It may be gradual. It may be instant. I know a woman who was begging. She was praying for healing for 20 years, but God was healing through her. She was in a wheelchair and healing power was flowing through her. Yet here she is in a wheelchair and she was fine with that. She just kept believing. And after 20 years, she was able to get out of that wheelchair. So that was David Chotka's wife. So I really, the biggest thing is I want people to see Jesus, the power, the love, the power of their prayers. It's funny that I sent you a book. I don't know if you remember, I sent a prayer with every book to people that were in the book. And I said, please pray these things. I'm getting emails for some of the exact things on that list. And it just like, oh, look at you, Jesus. Like one of them was to help them see you in a new way. I have heard that one so many times from believers that have been believers for a long time. Sometimes our faith gets stale for whatever reason. We go through trials and different things, and this will stir your faith. And if you can give this book to any person, it should inspire them. So,
And as you look back, like, I know with my journey, I don't know how you interact with people who've, received miraculous healings or just miraculous circumstances that happen in their life, or people who've been to heaven and back or hell and back and not be shifted, just like being in the presence of these people, hearing their stories. For you, how has this experience of hosting the podcast and meeting all these people, like how has that changed your faith when it comes to miracles, and like how real is heaven? Like I feel like those must be off the charts compared to where they were when you started, at least to some degree.
Oh, off the charts is a good word for it. Sometimes I think I have too much of a heaven mindset because, we are supposed to occupy. You think about the disciples when Jesus, ascended to the Father and they're standing there just looking up, and the angels are like, guys, there's stuff to do. You can't just stand there and think about, be taken with him. But no, it has blown me away, Shaun. I continue to be blown away. And I think in the beginning, it was so funny. I didn't realize I had God in a box, as John says. Again, John, poor John. Um, Number one, it's completely opened my eyes. I feel like I continue to learn who God is. And I'll be honest with you, I think until we get to heaven, just because we've heard this from so many experiencers, we're not going to fully grasp who he is. I mean, the Bible is all we need here. We have everything we need. And we have the Holy Spirit, who's an advocate, a helper, and gives us that discernment that we need. But my eyes have just been so open. And the power of prayer, hearing these people talking about how they see the prayers in heaven. We have Gabe Perot, we have Jim Woodford. I don't feel like Dean, no, Randy. I can't remember which ones. They have seen the prayers. There's so many. I think all of them possibly, but I know Jim Woodford had the 6 contrails that he saw, and there were 6 people praying for him. Hearing those things, and I know Dean, I think he saw angels being dispatched to prayer. It just lights your brain up like, oh my goodness, this is all true. This is all what the Bible says. And our prayer is so powerful. So it's inspired my prayer life. It's totally changed my prayer life. And I feel like I see ministry differently now. I've been asked to speak to a few different groups. There was one conference, but I would be uncomfortable when people say, come talk to us about your ministry, because I'm not Billy Graham with a stadium of people, and I also believe that he was in this protective bubble where nothing ever happened, which I think I said that in the book, which now I know is comical, but we put on our armor every day. God's with us. We do have protection. I don't mean to say that, flippantly, but we all have a ministry. And that's what I want people to see when they read the book is that, God, even there's examples of God using people while they were in their pit. Mike Olson, when he was struggling, there was a man who called him in the middle of the night who he had met at a fundraiser or something. And Mike was really struggling, and he was able to talk to that man and keep him from committing suicide. And, we might have to censor that out. I'm sorry. I'll say that again. He was able to help him. He was able to stop harm that was potentially going to be self-induced. So, and Mike was at a low point when that happened. So that's another light bulb moment. I think you feel like when you're at this pit, God can't possibly use you. You're the one that needs help. But there's examples of that through the book. So we all have a ministry. I see God differently, and I see people differently, Shaun. I think I used to, and I don't mean this in a negative connotation. I used to see people by their denomination, like, oh, she's my Church of God friend, or oh, that's my Catholic friend, or oh, that down the street. And I didn't think, I don't know why. I guess I always grew up and I would hear people say that. And I don't see people like Heidi. She's just Heidi. I don't put labels on people like I used to. And I do think theology is important, but the heart of a person, even Jesus says that, like, it's what's in your heart it's more important than the name on your church, as far as denominations of Christianity goes. Hopefully you're in the right Christian church, but so I see people differently. I don't know, and I just see that we're all broken people that need Jesus. So those are a few of the ways that it has changed me. And there's a funny story. Sometimes my poor husband, he hears things he wouldn't hear from me because of the NDEs. Like, I'm having surgery on my foot Friday for this painful neuroma, and we didn't know I had that. And so we were at a gala, a benefit, and my foot hurt so bad. I was like, please pull the car around and just please, my foot is killing me. Can't walk. And he was like, oh, honey, come on. You can make it. So I had to walk to the car. We got in the car. I was so mad at him. And I was like, I'm just going to tell you this right now, because in your life review, you're going to see this moment. You're going to feel the pain of what I'm feeling right now, because I know this happens, and I forgive you in advance. So sometimes there are things that just come out of my mouth just to be silly for a moment, but because I've heard so many of these experiences. So and he just laughs, but anyway, yeah, it's changed my life completely, and I'm excited for heaven. But I also have a fire in my heart for people to hear these testimonies, and they're hearing them. I just heard someone have a Hellish NDE sharing online the other day, and he said at the beginning, I had seen the videos on YouTube of people who died, and they talked about Jesus, and I didn't listen. And it was like, oh, do you know that how amazing that is? We are doing his work, you know? So, and now he is one. God gave him another chance. So maybe the video he saw on YouTube encouraged him to call out for Jesus in his experience. I don't know. But yeah, I could go on and on. It's just been really an amazing journey.
Well, I think John Burke's ears must itch when we all do interviews because we all talk about him or reference him as somehow as a critical part of our journey. The majority of us who work in this space, and I don't know, like I feel like as a guy who was thrust into the charismatic space unexpectedly, just in the midst of my career 10 years ago. Miracles are one thing, but I feel like the NDEs stretch your theology and your worldview even further, because we do have a precedent for miracles in the Bible, and I would argue, as I do in my new book, there's a precedent for NDEs even in the Bible. We do see those, especially with Jonah and the Apostle Paul. But just some of the stuff that you encounter in these NDE testimonies flies in the face of what we were raised, what we learned in church. You will be challenged on, like, how does somebody get to heaven? How does somebody get to hell? We have these very black and white and wooden ideas. And some of the people who share their testimony who end up in hell are not people we would have thought that would have ended up there. And there are other peoples who get pulled out of heaven because their grandma's been praying for them for multiple decades. And so, like, what do you do with that? We certainly don't want to go outside of what we read in the Bible and outside of like historic Orthodox Christian teaching. But I feel like the NDE space is going to challenge your worldview in a good way. But I feel like God's grace is so much more vibrant, and it is a lot bigger than I realized. Like God loves us so much. He's trying to give us every opportunity to turn to Him for as long as we are able to turn to Him. And I think and maybe God in a box is a great way to describe that. I think my view of God's grace was very microscopic before talking to all these experiencers, and now on the other side of it, I'm like, well, man, there's hope for there's hope for everybody up until, like, keep praying and keep praying those people into the kingdom. And so I think in the early stages of the NDE stuff, that's challenging because theologically it does push some buttons. But I feel like 7 years down the road, God's so much bigger. Heaven is so much more real. It's a real joy on this side of it, and like you described, it definitely impacts our outlook on life and ministry and all the things. Like I don't, while we are not touched the same way that, say, Randy or Mike Olson or some of these others were by heaven, I feel like there is enough of a spillover after talking to so many people that, we're so much more hopeful for, what these stories can do for people. Julie, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out more about the book, your podcast, all the things, where do we best discover you on the web?
everydaymiraclespodcast.com. And my email is simply everydaymiraclespodcast@gmail.com. But yes, and the book is on Amazon. Yeah.
Well, the book is definitely available wherever great books are sold. We'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the description and show notes to Julie's website, as well as links to where you can pick up your very own copy of her new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Julie Hedenborg. Once again, our book today was Everyday Miracles, 32 Real First-Hand Testimonies that Reveal God's Miraculous Power. And Julie, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to finally have you on the show. It's been great.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed it, Shaun.